The phone rang at 8:30 this morning. I watched it buzz on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I've eaten breakfast alone for the past 3 years. I didn't answer. I haven't answered that phone in weeks, and honestly, I don't miss the conversations that used to fill my days. My name is Dorothy, and at 65, I've made a choice that surprises even me. I avoid people now. Not all people, mind you, but most of them. The neighbors who used to drop by for coffee, the old friends from work who want to meet for lunch, even some family members who think I've lost my mind. They don't understand, and maybe that's okay. You might think this sounds lonely or sad, but let me tell you something about life after 60 that nobody prepared me for. There's a kind of emotional wisdom that comes with age, a clarity that cuts through all the noise we used to think mattered. After decades of saying yes when I meant no, of smiling when I felt tired, of keeping peace when I wanted truth, I've discovered something powerful about senior empowerment. The freedom to choose who deserves your energy. It started small. The book club where I spent more time listening to gossip than discussing literature. The volunteer committee that had turned into a battleground of egos. The weekly dinners with people who complained about everything but changed nothing. One by one, I began stepping back, creating space where chaos used to live. People called it antisocial. I call it self-preservation. Independent living isn't just about managing your own household or making your own decisions. It's about understanding that your time has become precious in ways you never imagined when you were younger. Every conversation, every commitment, every relationship now gets weighed against a simple question. Does this add meaning to my life, or does it drain it? The mornings are quieter now. I drink my coffee while watching birds at the feeder outside my window. There's no rush to get ready for someone else's schedule, no need to put on the mask of politeness that used to exhaust me by noon. The silence isn't empty, it's full of possibility. My garden has never looked better. I've read 12 books this year already. I've learned to paint watercolors and discovered I have a talent for it. These aren't the hobbies of someone hiding from life. These are the pursuits of someone who finally understands what living truly means. But here's what troubles me, what keeps me awake some nights: my daughter Sarah. She's 40 now, with teenagers of her own, and she's starting to worry about me. Last week, she drove over unannounced and found me perfectly content in my pajamas at 2 p.m., painting a landscape from memory. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know about what she thinks of my new life. "Mom," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "we need to talk." The conversation that followed changed everything, and I'm still not sure if it was for better or worse. Sarah's concern wasn't new. It had been building for months, ever since I stopped attending family gatherings and declined her invitations to join her book club. What she couldn't understand was that my withdrawal wasn't born from depression or giving up. It came from finally giving in to myself. For 43 years, I was married to Robert. He was a good man, the kind who brought me flowers on anniversaries and never forgot to take out the trash. But Robert was also the kind of man who filled every silence with words, who invited everyone we met to dinner, who turned our home into a revolving door of neighbors, co-workers, and distant relatives. I loved him deeply, but living with him meant I rarely experienced quiet. When he passed 3 years ago, the house felt impossibly large and eerily silent. Everyone expected me to crumble, to need constant company to fill the void he left behind. The ladies from church started a rotation, dropping off casseroles and staying for hours to keep me company. Friends called daily to check on me. Sarah moved her family dinner to my house every Sunday, filling my dining room with the chaos of teenage grandchildren and adult conversations I wasn't ready for. For 6 months, I played the part of the grateful widow who needed saving. But something strange happened during those long, supposedly lonely nights. I discovered I wasn't lonely at all. I was peaceful. For the first time in decades, I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. Life after retirement had already been an adjustment. After 30 years as a high school counselor, suddenly having no students to guide, no crises to solve, no daily purpose felt disorienting. But in those quiet months after Robert's funeral, I began to understand that finding purpose didn't mean filling every hour with activity or every room with people. Sometimes purpose looks like stillness. The emotional resilience I'd built helping teenagers navigate their problems served me well in my own senior reflection. I recognized the signs of people-pleasing that had dominated my earlier years. The exhaustion that came from being on all the time. The way I'd lost pieces of myself trying to be what everyone else needed. My mother used to say that getting older meant becoming more of who you really are, not less. At the time, I thought she was making excuses for her own growing selectiveness about social activities. Now I realize she was sharing hard-won wisdom about the freedom that comes with age. The breaking point came 6 months ago at my neighbor Patricia's birthday party. I sat in her crowded living room, listening to the same complaints about adult children, the same political arguments, the same gossip about people I barely knew. When Patricia asked me to help serve cake, I found myself standing in her kitchen, looking at 30-something faces I'd been seeing at these gatherings for years, and I felt completely invisible despite being surrounded by conversation. That night, I made a decision that would change everything about how I spent my remaining years. But first, I had to figure out what I actually wanted, not what everyone else expected from me. The decision started with small boundaries. I stopped answering calls during my morning coffee. I declined invitations that felt obligatory rather than enjoyable. I gave myself permission to leave social gatherings when I felt ready instead of staying until the bitter end out of politeness. Each choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. But late-life choices, I discovered, don't happen in isolation. Every boundary I set sent ripples through my family dynamics. Sarah's weekly check-ins became daily calls. My sister Helen started showing up unannounced with concerns about my hermit behavior. Even my granddaughter Lily, home from college for winter break, asked if I was okay, because I hadn't posted anything on social media in months. The real test came when I decided to skip Christmas dinner at Sarah's house. For 40 years, I'd been the grandmother who arrived early to help with preparations and stayed late to help with cleanup. I brought the same green bean casserole, asked the same questions about school and work, and smiled through the same family tensions that surfaced every holiday. This year, I wanted to spend Christmas morning in my own home, with my watercolors and a cup of tea, watching the snow fall in my backyard. Sarah's reaction was swift and fierce. "Mom, you can't just abandon your family because you've decided to become antisocial," she said during one of our increasingly difficult phone conversations. "The kids are asking why Grandma doesn't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell them?" Her words hit harder than I expected because they contained a grain of truth I'd been avoiding. Was I aging with dignity, or was I using wisdom as an excuse to hurt the people who loved me? The line between healthy boundaries and selfish withdrawal suddenly felt thinner than I'd convinced myself it was. Then came the call that changed everything. My neighbor Patricia, the same one whose birthday party had been my wake-up moment, was in the hospital. Her daughter lived across the country and couldn't get there immediately. Patricia had asked specifically for me. "She says you're the only person who doesn't exhaust her," the nurse explained. Sitting in that sterile hospital room, holding Patricia's hand while she slept, I realized we'd both been fighting the same battle. The constant pressure to be grateful for every visitor, every phone call, every invitation, even when they drained us. Patricia had been too polite to say what I'd finally learned to voice. Sometimes caring for yourself means disappointing others. But as I watched Patricia struggle to breathe, another truth emerged. My withdrawal hadn't just been about protecting my energy. It had also been about protecting myself from moments exactly like this one. From the possibility of loss, of being needed, of having to show up when showing up felt too hard. When Sarah arrived at the hospital that evening, having heard about Patricia through the neighborhood network I'd been avoiding, she found me there. The look that passed between us contained years of unspoken tension, love, and misunderstanding. We both knew that what happened next would determine not just our relationship, but whether my choices had been about wisdom or fear. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, settling into the chair beside me. "Patricia's daughter called me. She wanted to thank you for being here when she couldn't be." I nodded, still holding Patricia's hand. "She's been alone too much lately. We all have." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching Patricia's steady breathing. "I found something today," she said finally, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. "I was cleaning out Dad's old office upstairs, the one you said you weren't ready to deal with yet." My heart stopped. Robert's office had remained untouched since his death, a shrine to a life I wasn't ready to dismantle. I'd asked Sarah and her brother to handle it eventually, but eventually had never come. "There were letters, Mom. Dozens of them. All addressed to you, but never sent." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. They're from someone named David Chen. The postmarks go back 45 years. The name hit me like a physical blow. David Chen. The art teacher at my first job in California, before I met Robert, before I moved back to settle into the life everyone expected me to live. David, who had encouraged my painting, who had seen something in me I'd forgotten existed until 3 years ago when I picked up a brush again. He wrote to you every few years, Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. The last letter is from just 6 months ago. He's been trying to find you since Dad passed. Someone must have told him. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside were letters spanning decades, each one a window into a life I'd chosen not to live. David had become a renowned artist, had traveled the world, had never married. In every letter, he mentioned remembering our conversations about art, about dreams, about the fear of settling for less than what your soul demanded. The most recent letter contained a newspaper clipping about a gallery opening featuring emerging senior artists. Dorothy, his handwriting read, if this finds you, know that it's never too late for rediscovery after 60. I'm curating a show for artists who found their voice later in life. Your paintings from those months we knew each other still hang in my studio. They were that good. If you're still creating, I'd love to see what 45 years of living has brought to your art. Sarah was crying now, and I realized I was too. Mom, why didn't Dad give these to you? I closed my eyes, understanding flooding through me. Robert had loved me, but he'd also been terrified of losing me to the dreams he couldn't share. His protection had become a prison neither of us acknowledged. Because he knew, I whispered. He knew I might have chosen differently. Patricia stirred in her bed, her eyes opening to find both of us there. Dorothy, she said weakly, did you tell her about new beginnings? About how it's never too late to surprise yourself? I looked at Sarah, then at Patricia, then at the letters in my lap. For 3 years, I'd been so focused on protecting myself from other people's expectations that I'd missed the most important truth of all. My withdrawal hadn't been about finding myself. It had been about punishing everyone else for the choices I'd been too afraid to make 45 years ago. Sarah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need to tell you something about your father that I've never admitted to anyone, including myself. She leaned forward, still clutching tissues from her earlier tears. Robert wasn't the villain in this story. I was the coward. The words came out like a confession I'd been carrying for decades. He didn't keep those letters from me because he was controlling. He kept them because I asked him to. Not with words, but with every choice I made to play it safe, to be the person everyone needed me to be instead of the person I actually was. Patricia's weak squeeze of my hand encouraged me to continue. When we got married, I put my paints away. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pick them up again when life settled down. But life never settles down, does it? There's always another reason to wait, another person to take care of, another excuse to avoid the risk of being truly seen. I looked at Sarah through my tears. Your father loved me enough to let me hide from my own dreams. That's not his fault. That's mine. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. But Mom, you're painting now. You've been creating beautiful things for months. Yes, but I've been doing it in isolation, the same way I've been living. I've been so angry at everyone for not understanding me that I forgot the most important part of wisdom with age. It's meant to be shared, not hoarded. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper, but her words cut through everything. Dorothy, what if Robert kept those letters because he knew that someday, when you were ready, you'd find your way back to who you were meant to be? What if he was protecting your choice to choose differently when the time was right? The emotional closure I'd been searching for wasn't about avoiding people or proving my independence. It was about understanding that my life's turning point after 60 wasn't about rejecting my past, but about finally having the courage to integrate all the parts of myself I'd kept separate for so long. I looked at Sarah and saw not judgment, but hope. I want to submit my paintings to David's gallery show, I said. But I don't want to do it alone. I want you there with me. I want to stop hiding from the people who love me, even when love feels complicated. Sarah smiled through her tears. Mom, I've been waiting my whole life to meet the woman who painted those watercolors in your living room. Patricia squeezed my hand one final time. Now that, she whispered, sounds like a life worth living. 3 months later, I stood in David Chen's gallery, surrounded by paintings I'd created over the past year. Sarah stood beside me, her arm linked through mine, watching strangers examine watercolors that had emerged from my deepest solitude. The opening night of Second Bloom, Artists Over 60, had drawn a crowd I never expected. Not just art lovers, but people my age who'd come to see what was possible when you stop apologizing for who you are. David approached us, his hair silver now, but his eyes still holding the same spark I remembered from 4 decades ago. "Dorothy, the response to your work has been extraordinary. 3 pieces sold already, and the art critic from the Times wants to interview you about finding your voice later in life." I smiled, but my attention was caught by a woman about my age standing before my painting of Patricia's hospital room. She was crying softly, and when she noticed me watching, she walked over. "I'm 68, she said simply. "I've been telling myself for years that it's too late to start the writing I always dreamed of doing. Your painting of that hospital room, it's about second chances, isn't it? About how the most important conversations happen when we finally stop running from them." I nodded, understanding that these timeless lessons we carry often find their way to exactly the people who need them. It's about recognizing that the time we have left is too precious to spend it living someone else's version of our story. Sarah squeezed my arm. "Mom, Lily's here. She brought her portfolio to show you." My granddaughter appeared, carrying a folder of her own artwork. "Grandma, I never knew you were an artist. These paintings make me understand why you needed space to find this part of yourself. I've been hiding my art too, afraid people would think it was just a phase." The circle was completing itself in ways I couldn't have imagined. Senior resilience, I realized, isn't just about surviving what life throws at you. It's about having the courage to bloom again, even when everyone assumes your growing season is over. Later that evening, Sarah and I sat in my kitchen, the same one where I'd watched the phone ring months ago. But now the silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibility. "I understand now why you needed to pull away," Sarah said. "You weren't avoiding us. You were finding the person you needed to be to come back to us whole." I looked out at my garden, where spring flowers were beginning to emerge. The most important thing I learned is that choosing yourself isn't selfish when it helps you become the person others need you to be. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is showing them what it looks like to live authentically. These are life's quiet victories, not the grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but the small, brave choices to honor who you are beneath all the roles you've played. At 65, I'm not avoiding people anymore. I'm choosing them carefully, the way I choose my colors when I paint. And that has made all the difference.